Alright, the home lab lovers are going to like this video, and pretty much anyone who likes little server setups or little clusters of PCs. If you don't know already, you can get these mini PCs off eBay used really cheap. A lot of times you can find some fantastic deals. In fact, every one of these mini PCs has a Ryzen 5 in it. 4 of the 5 have a 6 core, which is insane, and I'm not talking with hyper-threading, I'm talking 6 real cores, which is insane, and they can have up to 64 gigabytes of RAM in there, which I am going to upgrade. So you can get a big punch for a very little amount of money. However, the big problem is, do you really want a pile of these little mini PCs sitting around on your desk with wires going everywhere? The answer to that is no, so that is what made me want to build a really cool rack for it. I have seen some people sort of come up with interesting little shelves, but again, nothing really holds them or is like designed for them, so I don't feel it's really that cool, nor slick of a setup. But I wanted to build a custom, basically like server rack, and treat these as if they were like 1U or 2U size servers, but just miniaturize everything, and I wanted to be able to just slide stuff in and out and make it super easy. I do have some cheap 3D printers, so I want to try and 3D print components and then get some raw materials. So I did find some 2020 aluminum extrusion and some angle bracket aluminum extrusion that I could pick up, and then I was going to design everything that I needed to hold all that together just in Tinkercad, which is kind of nice for anyone watching this because it's a really easy to get into 3D modeling software. It's just like shapes, and you either subtract or minus them, and you just build up a part. It's very simple. You don't need to be very smart with 3D software, because I have never had the time to really learn like Fusion 360, but you can make some pretty cool parts in it. So in my head, this is pretty much what I came up with, just using what I had in those raw materials. It did take a few iterations, because the cool thing about 3D printing is you can just print something out that you think might work, and then you find out what does and doesn't work, and then you improve the piece and do that process over and over again. I will find a way to share these 3D printed files. Again, they're not anything amazing, but hopefully maybe they can give you an idea of what to start with, or you like to build enough to just print the stuff yourself. So once I had a rough idea of what I was going to do, that's when I started cutting all the aluminum stuff. The great thing about aluminum is if you have a chop saw, even a cheaper one, a wood blade will work on this stuff. So you're not limited at a household on what you can all do. So you can just get some of the raw materials or just like long cuts of it, and then you can cut it down to size, which is absolutely amazing. And it does cut very easily. The chips are a little hot, so maybe you want to wear a long sleeve shirt or something. Definitely some squints, I guess. I don't know. You want to protect your eyes because they're probably not good to get in your eyes. But yeah, it's really that easy. Just a quick warning, this stuff does come quite sticky. Whatever protective like plastic they put on it leaves a residue. I tried soap and water, I tried Goo Gone, and even a dishwasher, but really the only thing that worked was acetone. I had a general height that I wanted, and I could start building like the corner frames. However, the part that actually separates it between like the left and right side of the server rack, that I had to wait until I had all my plastic parts set up so I can kind of judge exactly what that width was going to be with the PC sitting in there on top of like the little caddy that you'll see later. So I didn't cut any of those like cross beams until much later. My first design idea was like these little legs, and I was going to use those little those extrusion attachments to sort of make a little hook shelf and put these little plastic pieces on there. The little rubber pads would fit in there nicely, and then I would just keep sliding them in on top of each other, like each server. However, it presented this problem where every server is basically like pinched on top of each other, and you can't really access the screws unless you pull like each one out one at a time. I didn't like that, and I didn't like the fact that if it like got nudged or pushed back or forward too far, it would just fall in or like get stuck in some weird way. And that's when I decided to develop like an actual rail system with a caddy that can slide in there, and that is kind of what the bulk of the 3D printing will be, is just designing these rails. That's really the only component, and the caddy obviously. One of the happy accidents with this whole rail design is just the way it clips onto that actual aluminum. There's some overhang of plastic. Well, the caddy slides in there perfectly, and it's like held downwards and like upwards and side to side. It's pretty locked in there, so really there isn't much movement at all. I do have holes for set screws if I decide I really want to like drill a hole in the left slide and put a screw in there. So that's optional, but so far I haven't seen a real reason to do that. But again, the possibility is there. So before I cut all the remaining pieces, I did assemble the full caddy velcroed to the actual PCs. This seemed to be the easiest, quickest way for me to actually attach it to the caddies without being anything like permanent or more screws or anything. I just thought it'd be simple. Again, this is a side project to a side project, so I didn't want to get too crazy. But again, once I had everything assembled, I could measure that total distance or that total width between the two like vertical sidebars, and that's how I got my number to cut the actual like inner bars. So if you were to repeat this, I wouldn't like do any numbers I do, because all printers are a little bit different, and you might be more accurate if you just like measure it yourself once you've assembled everything. So at that point, all the pieces are cut, and we're just going to use all those little like corner L bracket things to attach all the 2020 together. when you build all this, it's really important to know that as you tighten up the set screws and those little L-shaped connector pieces, they do push the material a little bit. So you kind of have to tighten them both and then back it off ever so slightly, so then you can move your pieces into the perfect position. If you just put them in the position you think they are, like by lining them up on the edges, and then you start tightening things, it's going to throw it off a little bit, both like the height and like where it aligns on there. So again, snug them up, then loosen it just a tiny bit, and then slide it back to like where it's supposed to be. Make sure you push down and then tighten everything up. If you are copying this build verbatim, maybe there'll be some pictures or something in like a folder that I release. I'm not really sure, but you're gonna pretty much copy the general shape, but again, it's gonna vary as you sort of assemble stuff. I didn't keep like perfect to my like 3-dimensional design that I did in Tinkercad. I just sort of put things together, and as they felt like they were working, and I measured and made sure I had enough room for all the servers or the mini PCs, that's kind of what guided me on putting everything together. And then the actual assembly, I'm just making sure to keep things pretty square as I build things up, and just keeping consistency with how I put in those little L brackets and everything else. So it's not really rocket science. It's just pretty much assembly. You're just putting stuff together. Now, one thing I should mention is you're not going to put the top pieces on any of this. You're basically going to just build it from the bottom up, because you do need to put the little corner brackets down the main like central channels on the vertical beams, and so you obviously can't cap it off, because then you can't put them in, because these aren't the drop-in style T-nuts. You could get those if you really wanted to, and do a slightly different way of putting this together with like kind of a triangle bracket, things that are more external, but this seemed to be a cleaner approach. And honestly, these L brackets are essential to what holds these rails up. So I am going to assemble all the rails and start putting them in there, and just getting a few of the PCs and caddies loaded just to make sure things feel pretty square. It's not super easy to get everything squaring up perfectly, because some of this stuff is a little bit bent. I don't know if my dishwasher warped it with the extreme heat or it came that way, but some stuff is a little off. So I'm trying to build up some of the caddies to make sure things are square and they're sliding in nicely before I like put the caps on and everything and start tightening up stuff too much. I did notice there was a few times that I had to loosen some things and sort of wiggle the whole frame just to let it settle into a more square format that made the caddies feel nicer, and then retighten things. To actually test those out though, we do have to assemble the caddy, and like I said, it's pretty darn easy. I did design all this stuff to print without any supports, because I've never dialed my printers in enough to get that. I'm a 3D printing enthusiast, but not to where I'm like tweaking my printers a million times. They just, as long as they can get me somewhat of a working print, that's all that I care about, because I don't really print knickknacks, really just total functional stuff like this. So again, everything's printed, so you can just print it without supports. But anyways, I'm just cutting pieces of actual Velcro. This is 1/2-inch Velcro that fits in the slits. If you wanted to use larger pieces, I thought it would cover too much, like the fan holes, and just insulate the PCs. Probably negligible, but either way, I try to keep it as narrow as possible. Just 2 pieces, tighten it up pretty good, not too tight, because you will bend the actual prints, because there's not that much going across underneath. Really, we just want the side rails that allow things to slide in. Now, before getting to this actual part where we're assembling that back portion, because that'll sort of shield the actual back of the PCs, I didn't want to leave all the wires sticking out open. Because this is such a little device, I feel like it's pretty easy to knock it over, or like let something smack into the back of it. So I wanted to protect it a little bit by putting those back rails, and that might also allow me to put some sort of like casing on the sides and the back, and then have some fans on the very top to sort of channel air like through the PCs, past the switch, power stuff, and then up and out the back. I'm not sure yet, but that's just kind of how I designed it. So at this point, I'm just adding the remainder like vertical poles, putting on the top ones. You do have to think about how you're assembling this as you like put stuff in there, because obviously you can't put the 2 end pieces on the top and then try and slide the middle one in. You got to slide the middle one in first and then do the other one. So I tried to get the outer ones tightened up though with that inner one loose, and then I made sure it matched up with the vertical poles in the middle, and just again try to keep everything square. I would rotate this thing and lean it on certain sides so I can use gravity to my advantage to really make sure things are being pushed down into the right corners and everything is like really attached well. I'm pretty sure my saw puts a slight angle cut into these pieces, because none of them seem to fit perfectly, but it wasn't enough to like make things so out of square that the stuff didn't work. So you should be pretty good with whatever you're doing at home. None of this is that precision made, especially the 3D printed stuff. There is wiggle room on all the pieces that I made, so that way you didn't have to be like perfect. At this point, your rack should be done, and you can start sliding in your caddies. This whole caddy 3D printed design is actually really nice, because as long as nothing gets much larger than what I've already like put in here, meaning like that, I think it's about 7 inches wide, I can design a caddy to fit any different bottom. So I have a special caddy for the switch that has more of the support towards the back. I have a special caddy for the 4 think centers, and then I have a really special one made for the actual HP one, because the bottom is actually like it like protrudes. So there's like a center protrusion, but I could just custom make the caddy to go around that, and it still adapts to the system perfectly fine. And that's the beauty of 3D printing, is you're really adaptable to things. And as long as I had those side rail like slidable portions, I could design the middle to be whatever I wanted, and that gave me a lot of flexibility for what I put in here. And even in the future, as I try and put different models in here, if it gets wider, I can always expand the width of this whole thing and then just print new caddies for everybody. But my point is, it's pretty flexible for whatever anyone is trying to jam in here to some extent. At this point, we do have to get all the wires connected, at least all the basic wires like the networking stuff and the power cables. Now there is a few different options that you can do. I thought about printing special like clips that keep everything clean, but I was starting to get to that point where I'm spending too much time building this than I am using it. And so I just opted for Velcro because I had a bulk roll of Velcro. It just made sense to get it all rigged up in there really quickly. That way I could finish the frame, because if I start doing clips that go in those like T-slots, that means I have to remove the top, slide stuff down in there, and it just became to be too much. And honestly, I think the Velcro looks pretty nice, and you'll see as I do more that it's a pretty clean approach. Now, the power pack stuff is really ugly, and then this is my biggest regret on this project. I do have an option in the future as I get things going to buy one bigger power supply and then just wiring that up to each mini PC, because you can buy all the barrel plugs, even the Lenovo like specific ones, and I can just wire them up that way and get rid of this. But for now, just to get things up and running and going, I'm just setting the power packs down there. If I feel like they're getting too hot, I'll put a fan down there. If not, things are just fine, although a little ugly. But as you can see with the finished product, I think things are really clean. There's no wires hanging anywhere. Everything is nice and tight and set in there, and it looks pretty darn good as far as I'm concerned. I really didn't know what this would look like by the time I finished it, because again, this was pretty much like all in my head, and then I threw it into Tinkercad, and I've never done anything like this before. So for what it is, I think it turned out really nice. There is a lot of improvements that could be made, and especially if I had some more time, and I might visit this project back in the future, it's just improving the actual parts that I'm using, especially the 3D printed parts, and give it a little more flexibility and a little more standardization where people can really apply this to any mini PC they have. Right now, I know this works with these Lenovo PCs and the HP PCs and basically any little mini PC that's only 7 inches wide. If you start to get wider, it's going to cause some issues. You're going to have to redesign the prints or like kind of cut and just mess with the print files. It's not going to be easy. But yeah, overall, I'm super excited how it turned out. I think it's a beautiful mini little server rack. I think it looks absolutely slick, and it's definitely better than just a pile of computers getting hot and full of dust in the corner. It's going to serve its purpose really nicely, and as I find it to be useful, maybe I'll try and build like a V2 and do all the standardization and just do better at printing. My prints are a little ugly just because I'm just getting things done, but in the future, I'd love to have some really beautiful parts made in like Fusion 360 where they've got just nice contoured edges and just everything has a cleaner, more efficient design. But for now, it's pretty darn good. Alright, that's pretty much it for this build. I hope you guys enjoyed this little how-to, and maybe it inspired you to get your pile of PCs up on a mini rack. I would love to hear back from any of you if you ever attempt this or even attempt like a variant of it. I will put links in the description to all the stuff I used, and I will put the files there as well, so if you want to print this stuff out, you can. Definitely do some test prints though. Don't trust it fully because my stuff's not calibrated, so who knows what it'll look like on your machine. But either way, if you need some help with the files, just tell me in the comments or just let me know and I'll try and get some help and help you out. But yeah, thanks for watching.